So again, thank you all for joining us today at our December StaR Forum. My name is Andy Monsoor. I'm the project manager for the StaR Child Health Network and the StaR Forum. Before we introduce you to this month's presenter, we'd just like to take the next 5 minutes just to go through what the StaR Forum is all about and what StaR Child Health Network is for those who are new to this forum. So next slide, please.
1 second. I think it's hanging. Yes, there you are.
Thank you. So founded in April of 2009, the StaR Child Health Network is a network of leading experts in pediatric clinical research and methodology. The network has 4 main objectives, and those objectives are to raise awareness, become a global center of providing resources and training, assist in the development of new standards, and conduct empirical research all around the field of the design, conduct, and reporting of clinical research in children. So since September of this year, we've created this interactive monthly webinar series called the StaR Forum, which features the latest developments in child health research. And our overarching aim is to set the agenda for the next 10 years of useful, efficient, translational, and impactful child health research. Next slide, please. So our kind of goal with the StaR Forum is for the forum to cover a variety of different themes. And so these webinar themes are displayed here on this slide. They're also on our website at www.starchildhealth.org. I won't go into them into detail today, but you can definitely take a look on our website if you're interested in learning more. And as I'm sure we're all already aware of the etiquette when it comes to Zoom meetings, we just like to lay out some engagement guidelines that are here. We just ask that you keep all your questions to the end of the presentation. If you are not speaking, we just ask that your microphone remains muted, and that's located at the lower left corner of your screen. And then when it comes to the question and answer period at the end of the presentation, you're more than welcome to use the chat feature, and then our moderator will call upon you. At that time, you can either ask your question in the chat box or unmute yourself and ask your question via that way. And so with that being said, I'd just like to turn it over to one of our co-chairs of the StaR Child Health Network, Terry Clausen, to introduce today's speaker.
The next slide, please. Hi, I'm Terry Clausen, and I've been with StaR since the beginning, actually. And it actually, today's topic ties into my 2 mini sabbaticals that I've had during my academic career. So as you heard, StaR started in 2009, and it was kind of born out of, I was at the Amsterdam Medical Center at the time. And so it's really remarkable that today's speaker actually is currently training at that place where StaR was born, so to speak. And so Dr. Hanneke van Hoof is received her MD and her master's in clinical epidemiology, and she's currently finishing her specialization in obstetrics and gynecology at the Amsterdam Medical Center in the Netherlands. And my second sabbatical was, I was at Metrics in Stanford. And that's when I first met Hanneke. And she was doing a postdoc at the Meta Research and Innovation Center and being supervised by Professor John Ioannidis and Professor Steve Goodman. And I got to attend their weekly metrics meetings, which are really lively and interesting and very intellectually stimulating. And that's where I learned about her research that we're going to now hear in a more mature form. So she combines her clinical research work with research in which she supervises several PhD students. She's previously focused on improving evaluation research in obstetrics and gynecology by coordinating development of core outcome sets and setting international research priorities in obs-gyne. So the research project that I heard about at that time, and I said, how cool, I'd really like to learn more about that, is how can clinical research increase its usefulness to inform clinical practice and assessment of 350 randomized controlled trials in preterm birth. Hanneke, please take it over, and we'll return at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry, for this nice introduction. So I think it's good afternoon for you guys in Canada, and well, good evening for the people attending from Europe. Just as we are some participants maybe coming from Europe, are there any from Europe? Maybe somebody can unmute himself and say, or are we all Canadians or coming from the other side of?
Well, I'm actually Canadian, so to say, but presently in Europe at the moment.
Okay, Alex is talking, I hear. Well, that's great. But it's great to have this digital opportunity to reach out to each other from all over the world and to see how together we can improve clinical research. As I understand from Terry, also you are in this forum, and many people are clinicians, but also researchers who all aim to improve research. And I hope with this talk I can give maybe some new ideas to this work people are already doing. And as Terry already alluded, the title will be Usefulness in Randomized Controlled Trials, a project I've been doing in Stanford. So just Googling usefulness, you will find many different descriptions, but maybe they're all aiming the same, that something is useful when it serves the goal that you have. And for these people, well, they might have different goals, depends a little bit what they are looking for. And in case they look for gold, the method they are doing might be the proper one. At least it is useful for them if they are looking for this golden nugget. And the same might be also for medicine, that we are constantly looking for improving of what we already know based on clinical practice, but therefore we have research that can really help us to understand what we already know, but also to improve this knowledge and to get a richer and really get this golden nugget. And I think the more useful we can get this research, the quicker we can get to useful answers. So that was the mainly motivation to get, as I'm a clinician in obs and gynae, and in the field I work in, it would be great to have increase the usefulness of research. And it might not be sounding not familiar to you when we have already encountered a lot of limitations in research. And just to give you a small insight on what we will be talking today, usefulness will not cover methodological issues. We have, as we have been seeing in several decades already, that there might be problems on hypotheses, that they are not clear, or that their different hypotheses have been taken. This is a symbol called harking. Maybe the measurements taken are not really, well, they are very heterogeneous or not capturing the thing you really want to measure, or there is some cherry picking, errors in statistics or in any other method to use. The simply fraud issue, which is also an important but different topic than today's talk. And then we have issues on transparency and usefulness. And the reason they are together is that actually transparency will be, we capture this in the usefulness assessment we will present to you today. And this usefulness in research focusing, well, this approach on usefulness in research has been launched by John Ioannidis already in 2016 in his paper on PLOS Medicine, in which he used a provocative title saying why most clinical research is not useful. And in this paper, he shows this table in which he elaborates on 8 features. And I will go through them one by one, and you will notice that those features will be an important base of this talk. So the first feature is problem base, asking the question, is there a health problem that is big or important enough to fix? And the other one is context placement. Has prior evidence been systematically assessed to inform the need for new studies? Information gain, is the proposed study large and long enough to be sufficiently informative? Pragmatism, does the research reflect real life? And if it deviates, does this matter? Patient-centeredness, does the research reflect top patient priorities? Value for money, is the research worth the money? Feasibility, can this research be done? And transparency, are methods, data, and analysis verifiable and unbiased? So he claims that those features should be considered when appraising clinical research, if it's useful or not. So, well, it's nice to have this table there, but we ask ourselves if we could really quantify this usefulness in research. And therefore, this project was born with the idea to operationalize those criteria to appraise the usefulness of clinical research and to demonstrate how this criteria can be applied in randomized controlled trials, specifically in preterm birth, to choose a topic, well, not a topic unfamiliar to this audience. I think it's well known that it's a big problem, a global problem. 1 in 10 children are born preterm, and it's not only consequences for that moment, but for the whole life expectation of those children and societies as well. It's a research priority in obstetrics and gynecology, and the good thing is it's a mature research field. Preterm birth has been there already for a long time, and we can see if there has been any improvement over time. And other striking thing is that we don't have a solution yet for preterm birth, at least maybe for some high-risk women with a previous preterm birth, but the bigger bunch is on women who did not deliver before, and they can get a preterm birth as well. So we don't have good strategies yet how to prevent it. So increasing the usefulness might, in this field of research, from my perspective, might be having a great value. So how did we approach this project? Our goal was to provide a checklist that can help to inform researchers, but also other stakeholders like patient peer reviewers, journal editors, guideline developers, and policymakers about the usefulness of an intervention study to really inform clinical practice. And well, the practical use of this checklist is that, as you can see on the right hand here, you see the 8 features as you have seen before, in which second feature, context placement, is split in 2 parts, asking if there is a systematic review being cited in the paper, or maybe a systematic review being performed as part of a paper, or even a meta-analysis. And then the last feature is also divided in 6 parts, in which all transparency issues regarding registration, protocol publications, funding, and data availability are split. Well, to get our sample of RCTs, we used actually this umbrella review published not that long ago in the Cochrane Library, looking for all Cochrane reviews on prevention of preterm birth. And what we simply did was updating their search, which you can see here, which is a broad search on preterm birth, and including all those systematic reviews on all type of interventions that aim to preterm birth. So it's not only the primary interventions we know, like, for example, medications like progesterones or surgery like cerclage, but also secondary preventions like pregnant women with diabetes getting any medication to benefit the diabetes, but also as a secondary benefit, maybe reduce preterm birth. Excluding non-RCTs or when we couldn't find any translation or full text. And well, just slightly an overview of our methods. We registered a protocol. It was quite a bunch of work. So we had 3 reviewers going through all those manuscripts, and double data extraction was done for 25% of the data, which we had a good agreement. And also after doing slightly a little bit more of double checking, we remained on this agreement. So we kept it separate after that to make it feasible. And you will see in the next few slides when we report the results that we will mainly present proportions and also show the subgroups showing usefulness of the features of usefulness of RCTs performed after 2000, from 2010 in the last 10 years, and RCTs performed before that time, just to see if we have been learning so far and where we can still improve. So we started with a sample of more than 1,000 systematic reviews. Actually, we found out that one of the most important prevention methods we have, progesterone, there was a very outdated Cochrane review on that field. So we included an IPD on progesterone to make that, well, to have that as well in our sample. And on the end, we had over 50 RCTs or systematic reviews, including 350 RCTs in the sample. Just to give you an overview what that sample looked like, most of the trials are published after 2000. As you can see, there's an increase, but also the last years are less representative, which you can imagine as every systematic review has a delay on including the latest RCTs. So these are the year of publications of the RCTs. Most of the trials coming from Europe, as you can see here in the green line, or from North America, but also an increase in time. As you can see, we had some trials before 1980, but in the last years, also more Asian trials coming. And we also try to capture the impact factor of the journals publishing those trials, in which you can see that most of them are between 0 and 10, but also some higher impact factor. And I think this sample of 350 trials is highly representing more higher impact factor. As you can imagine, the sample is coming from Cochrane reviews with that selection already happening before that the Cochrane review is published. So now going into the results of usefulness. So this is a bird's eye overview on the usefulness overall, as you can see on the bars here, going from 0 to 100. I don't expect you to see it good because we will go through it one by one. But just to give you a bird's eye overview on what was the scoring for all preterm birth trials, and also some of them increasing over time, but some of them being stable or not being present, as you can see here. So I will go through them one by one to just give you a deeper sense of what those features are and the interpretation we did. And I'm more than happy in the discussion section of this talk, we will have plenty of time for that, to hear your thoughts about how those features, how they sound to you, and what your thoughts are, because I think it's good to keep the discussion open. It's not a stable thing. As a project group, we also had some good discussions before getting this checklist done. What we did find is the good inter-agreement between the reviewers also gave us a good idea of having, at least for within our group, a good understanding of what those 8 features were capturing. So the first one is problem-based, asking the question, is there a health problem that is big or important enough to fix? And this is very context specific. So for our sample in which we captured preterm birth trials, we wanted to see what proportions within those studies of children were born before 37 weeks. And this was the proportion in the placebo arm of those trials, or the the non-intervention arms, just to see if there are more screening type of trials having a low proportion of preterm birth, or more trials performed in high-risk women, like for example, triplets who have almost 100% chance of getting a preterm birth. So to give you a sense of what we found, it's here this figure showing the percentage of preterm births going from 0 to 100, and you see the distribution in which we did found a higher proportion around maybe, well, the median was 13%, so it's a little bit over the 10% population median of preterm birth of 10%, but with the range we found was from 0 to 100. So that is nice to see that actually all those RCTs are capturing different risk populations and trying to find answers on prevention of preterm birth on different risk populations. The second feature, called context placement, asks the question, has prior evidence been systematically assessed to inform the need for new studies? And we asked the question, is there already a systematic review available being cited in the paper, or have the authors done a systematic review as part of the paper? And you will see the next table is presenting to you the total sample of 350 RCTs and the proportions we found. For context placement being a systematic review being reported, we found more than half meeting that criteria. And you see in the second column, the last 10 years. So we see a slight increase that can be seen also here in this risk ratio, comparing the last 10 years with the years before that. So yes, context placement is done, but still half of the times there isn't a systematic review being cited. And the performance of a systematic review as part of the paper or even a meta-analysis is not more than 5% and also not really increasing in time. Just to show you an example of what we were really looking for, you might recognize the Lancet design in which the group of Norman et al. Did 2 progesterone studies, and in one publication they nicely show their search of systematic review and also performed a meta-analysis in another paper. And there has been a lot of debate. Actually, the group of Chalmers have really been trying to advocate this use, as the good thing is that you, at the moment you publish your paper, you update already the evidence with what the paper, in this case, Norman's paper, including prior systematic reviews, so that the reader is updated at that moment. The third feature, information gain, and is asking the question, is a proposed study large and long enough to be sufficiently informative? So this is might be a hard feature to capture, because overall, actually, I think as researchers, would like to get sufficient information for the purpose with respect for timing of previous knowledge the trial is done for the hypothesis it's trying to test. But on the end, this is very difficult to assess in all those individual trials, and we try to keep it simple and also feasible to do it as a checklist. So on the end, we ended in scoring, asking the question, does the study have 80% power for a clinically relevant outcome? In clinically relevant, meaning all outcomes that are not a surrogate or a composite, and for a difference that can be deemed to be clinically important. That is how we phrased it, but on the end, we had to acknowledge that a difference being clinically important is very difficult to find literature for every topic the researchers were doing the research for. So we had to rely on the researchers themselves choosing a clinically important difference. But in the utopia world, we would actually like to see other research stating what a clinically important difference can be for that specific health topic or that specific intervention. So here we captured power calculations and relevant outcomes. And here you can see the total sample of 350 trials, saying that also over half of the studies information gain was present, and it's not really a remarkable increase in time. And the reason for not having information gain was most of the times because there wasn't a power calculation reported. So that's in 50% of the time. But also the use of surrogate and composite outcomes. And that has that we can see that actually in the last 10 years, we are increasing the use of surrogate and composite outcomes. Here you see the risk ratio of 1.87. Just to give you a small insight on the things we found in the manuscripts. So the power calculations were really an issue, and some of them were nonsense at all. They only reported we aim for 80% power with an alpha and beta of 0.05 and 0.20. So obviously that is non-informative. Also nonsense statements like 32 infants are necessary to reach a power of 0.05% at the 80% confidence level. Really not a really nonsense statement. But most of the times we found more incomplete power calculations, like only reporting an absolute or relative risk reduction. For example, here the sample size was chosen to have a 80% chance of the 5% level of significance at demonstrating a 20% reduction of an antenatal admission during pregnancy in the Doppler group. So the 20% reduction, we don't know from where to where, if it's absolute or relative. So in that sense, it's still really non-informative to have this kind of description of power calculation. And finally, also sometimes only the difference of, in this case, a difference of 0.20 millimole between groups was strived, but we don't know coming from where, what the baseline is that we're looking from. So that was information gain. The fourth feature is pragmatism. Terry, I would like to ask you just to people, if they have questions and the need for clarification, they are more than happy. I'm more than happy if they can intervene or ask their questions in between. Of course, we will have time afterwards, but just to go through the 8 features, there might be some need for clarification.
Sure. So I'd ask people to just pop a message into the chat, which I'll monitor. And already we have one. What about a well-powered study with a reasonable surrogate outcome? That seems valid to me.
Yeah. So I think I like the discussion indeed in that sense. I would say surrogate outcomes, it's not to say they aren't useful at all. It's more that they might be more useful in the beginning phase of a clinical research question, in which you say, we need a surrogate outcome to see if this trial is feasible, and then getting that feasibility study done. It would be more useful to use a really hard endpoint, and there has been plenty of examples previously having really harmful effect, especially in cardiology. There are some examples in which surrogate outcomes are used and conclusions are based on those surrogate outcomes, and on the end, the effectiveness of those drugs were concluded by those surrogates, and on the end, people were dying of those drugs. So mortality wasn't captured in those trials, and those surrogate outcomes were not really good surrogates. So it's always difficult with surrogate outcomes to really know if they're reliable ones. So we are not really claiming here that surrogate outcomes should not be used, but I think there have been plenty of examples in the past that they are really tricky and that we should try to avoid them when possible.
And then he asks about composite of clinical outcomes.
Yeah. So the same for composites. Well, the reason to use composites is mostly a power issue. But I think we can resolve power issues by being smarter in our design, for example, doing prospective IPDs, getting researchers together from different places in the world and saying, okay, let's all do the same trial design, but in different places in the world, and use the same important clinical relevant primary outcome to get, when we put them all together in the prospective IPD, get the answer instead of you using a composite as a solution to get the own power in your study. And really on using composites, you should really know that the pathophysiology should all um, get the same result for all those composite outcomes. And we have plenty of examples that it's not the case for all kinds of studies. So also in this case, I think it's wise to avoid them if we can. But I like these questions and why? Because it's also important to acknowledge that those features are intending to increase usefulness. So it's not saying one is bad and one is good. It's good to acknowledge that there are too many drawbacks in surrogate and in composite outcomes that we should really avoid them when possible, but it's not saying if you use them, it will be useless nevertheless. So it's not a binary thing we try to capture here. Shall I go on for now, Terry? Or do you have more questions raising after this?
No, that's great. So thank you very much, Richard. And
happy to talk further on this because I think it's a very relevant thing. And information gain is actually the feature which I think raised the most discussion questions. Yeah. So the fourth feature is pragmatism. And this is an interesting one also. As we might know that pragmatism tries to capture research that reflect real life. And we also have seen that many claim pragmatism, but in reality, there aren't pragmatic trials. So what we try to capture here with the question is, do others claim pragmatism? Words in the manuscript could be, for example, pragmatic or naturalistic, real life, without obvious violation of pragmatism. Now here we had to also be pragmatic in our checklist, as there is the precise tool that tries to capture pragmatism of trials. But within our research group, we also had very experienced researchers trying to use this precise tool in assessment of RCT's pragmatism. And the finding was that it's actually impossible to do it as an external researcher reviewing the paper, that you can only really assess the precise tool by being a person within the research group and knowing how the trial was really done. So we had to rely on the reporting of pragmatism within a trial and finding real violation being single-centered blinded studies or addressing new interventions that are descriptions of really being more explanatory trials instead of pragmatic ones. And what we found was in our sample, we had around 5% trials claiming pragmatism and a quarter having also obvious violation of pragmatism. So they weren't really pragmatic by being single center, for example. And we didn't see any change in time. So this feature, patient centeredness, is trying to capture if the research reflects top patient priorities, asking the question, does the trial state details of patient research prior and or during trial design to influence chosen interventions and outcomes? And here we try to see if researchers in their manuscript were describing any core outcome sets that used in their study, core outcome sets that were developed by patients, or any patient priority research questions that were used in the manuscript, and we didn't find any descriptions of them. So that was something sad, but also gives room to improvement, I think. As maybe it's good to also explain that for research in preterm birth, they are both things are there already available. So we have a core outcome set of preterm birth studies, and we have the James Lind Alliance already published a decade ago, their top patient priority questions on preterm birth prevention. So it would be nice to have those things seen more implemented. This feature, this is the 8th one, captures, oh sorry, this is the 6th one. It captures the value for money. Is the research worth the money? And here we looked for value of information analysis or budget impact calculations being alluded in the manuscripts. And maybe you are unfamiliar with those terms, but it's important to highlight that those type of analysis are not a cost effectiveness analysis as done in a health technology assessment. So in a cost effectiveness analysis, you always take the results of the trial together with the cost and make a cost effectiveness analysis. But here we actually were curious on having all the arguments the researchers were having prior to the study, saying, okay, the investment in the study is really important because we expect that knowing the answer will potentially have this this type of health gain and also this type of gain in money, maybe reduction of any healthcare costs because of the health gain expected. And these kind of analyses are mostly also asked by funders. And it would be nice as, well, funders have a reason to ask for this, but I think as society, most time funding this kind of RCTs, it's good also that researchers are forced to think of this value for money consideration, the value of information. And not surprisingly, we also didn't find any of those kind of statements in the manuscripts. Here, this feature captures feasibility. This is the 7th feature in which we ask, can this research be done? And to capture this, we looked for all the sample size calculations and checked if the trial final sample size reached at least 90% of this calculated sample size. And we found that, yes, trials were mostly feasible, but also a bunch of trials were not reporting sample size, like shown prior. It's together with the power calculations. This information was always was lacking in 1/3 of the times. And we wanted to know also the reasons for not being feasible. And as you might imagine that data safety monitoring board interference because of real clear harm or real clear effectiveness might be a very good reason to stop a trial. So in that sense, we found 13 trials being not feasible because of DSMB interference. So there weren't that many. Transparency, this is the last one, in which, as you might remember, we had 6 questions. Capturing pre-registration, has the trial been pre-registered online? Has the full trial protocol been published prior to the trial commencement? And if yes, has there been any statement of protocol adherence, trial funding, conflict of interest, and the data, raw data being freely available? At least a statement. There were also statements saying we don't share our data, and that was checked as a positive, saying there was a statement on data availability, but of course not in a positive way. In this case, we found that yes, trial registration was done in a little bit more than 30%, in which not so many were pre-registered. So 1/3 of those ones who were registered were not registered before the first patient was included in the trial. And yes, we see an increase in time. So in the last 10 years, we see a real increase in trial registration, a little bit in pre-registration. And we see that's the same for protocol publications, although the numbers are still, absolute numbers are still low. The other transparency features like funding registration, that is quite okay. Conflict of interest statement, we are increasing that happily in the last 10 years. We are almost up to 80%. And data availability, it's very sad to say, but only 8% of the last 10 years trial are saying anything about the availability of data or sharing their code. So those were the 8 features. I hopefully gave you a clear description of what those 8 features are, what our interpretation were, and it's good to also acknowledge some limitations doing this exercise, so that hopefully, I heard from Terry that he wants to maybe consider to repeat this exercise for your side of research in neonatology. And well, the good thing is that we were able to do this assessment, but we really acknowledge that we had to depend on the completeness and faithfulness of the reporting. So the value for money, as explained before, might not be traditionally reported in manuscripts, but they might be reported in the funding applications. And on the other hand, maybe we just check too many boxes saying, yes, there was a power calculation, but on reality they were done post hoc. And we cannot check that, as there, sometimes you could see it in the way they phrase it, that it was real post hoc, but most of the times it's difficult to find that out. Well, another issue is that we don't claim to look for falsification of data or biased data. As you might remember, those images here, that those issues are not captured by the usefulness. So something could score very high in its usefulness, but being totally false data. So that is something that should be checked by other kind of methods. On the biased, of course, we have a risk of bias tool already provided by Cochrane. And we already touched on this item, saying that's not a binary evaluation. Like, for example, pragmatism. We don't want to claim that only pragmatic trials are useful. We are not really claiming that at all. It's more, this exercise is more important to find how many trials are pragmatic, and might there be more room for pragmatic trials. So in many cases, an explanatory trial has a very important benefit. It might be more important than a pragmatic trial at that point of time. But sometimes we miss our chance not doing a pragmatic trial design. So that is why it's not a binary thing, but it's good to, if we use this checklist in the designing phase of a study, we should consider this at least in our thinking. And as you might have seen, some items overlap with the CONSORT 2010 checklist, like, for example, transparency items. You can see the features 23, 24, 25 on the CONSORT checklist, also capturing registration protocols, etc. But doing this exercise gave us a great insight in how we can improve usefulness in preterm birth trials. And as a conclusion, I think we can say, yes, we are okay with the problem base. We are capturing all risk populations. We are also okay in context placement. Regarding information gain, it would be, I think, something to suggest to use less surrogate and composite outcomes and at least report power calculations. consider pragmatic designs where it is possible, involve patients and its outcomes that are important for them, evaluate value for money. Feasibility is quite okay. And for transparency, we are still not there. So pre-registration, protocol publications, and data sharing is increasing, but we are really still in the beginning phase of those features. And as a last slide, I think this proof of concept to empirically evaluate the usefulness of clinical research presented to you, I think we have been able to use this checklist quite okay. And we also have seen that we are really different from other checklists. For example, again, the Consort 2010, if they look on outcomes in feature 6, they are very clear in saying there should be a primary and a secondary outcome being defined, but there's nothing about the minimal important difference or any statement of what type of outcomes are more informative than others. And I think doing this exercise, we can do this in different domains of clinical research, and hopefully this can improve future research designs. And all these stakeholders written down here, I think they might benefit having at least a thought and a helping hand by this checklist. So here's a team who really helped getting this work done. Part of them from the Academic Medical Center, part of them from Metrics at Stanford, also from the Cochrane Preetam Booth, and from all over the other part of the world, supervising, but also really getting into the discussion of how we can improve research and its usefulness. Any questions? Thank you for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. And I encourage you to pop your questions in a chat box, or I'll call you forward to, we're a small enough group that people can actually voice their own questions. I'll get it started off. So going back to John Ioannidis' article on that most clinical research is not useful, did your research support that premise, or did you, in your area, did you refute it, or what's your conclusion, or is that pushing you too much to kind of commit?
No, not at all. It's, I think, because John actually in his paper he claimed to say, okay, most of those features, except for feasibility, he said most of these features aren't present, and he also splitted his argument into high impact factor, or the biggest journals compared to the other bunch. And he said that the bigger journals might score better in context placement and information gain, but for the other, and in some way we also found that there is some improvement by impact factor, but not that much. We didn't find. So what was surprising for me was the surrogate and the composite outcomes actually used more frequent in higher impact journals than in low impact journals. And that is something we should think of, I think, as, is that really what we should strive for? But on the other hand, he was right with many of the other features, that they are not present, or maybe in less than half of the times we report. For example, information gain, he was indeed right in saying that most of the trials are not really having information gain. And we found 50%, so that's, well, maybe he was more skeptic than I am. We are halfway through.
And you said 350 trials. How many patients did that represent? Like, was it thousands of patients, or?
Yeah, they are. Sorry, I'm clicking again. I have the paper here. I can see they are more than 1,000. No, they're, sorry, not 1,000. They were big trials and also mega trials. So they were not only, so they are 100,000. Let me see. Yeah, 400,000 participants in all continents. So
Wow.
most of them from North America, 80,000. So there was 92 trials, 80,000 participants, and in Europe also 93 trials, 56,000 participants. And from Asia, actually, it's interesting, 70 trials with more than 100,000 participants. So they are able to randomize more participants in their trials.
Right. Okay, Richard, why don't you ask or make your next comment? Unmute yourself. And
so, yeah, hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I was just saying that I think, great. People often view meta research as quite a critical discipline and making kind of overarching judgments, but the fact that you can give practical suggestions is really helpful for improving the quality of future trials.
And you mean practical suggestions for preterm birth trials in general?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So what were you hoping to hear in preterm birth trials? So it would be interesting from your perspective.
That's not an area I'm familiar with clinically, but I think the points that you raised about the different areas that trials can improve their practical application. So, for example, including some discussion about the economic benefits would be useful and easy to implement.
I'm not able to hear you fully. Sometimes your sentences were not.
Sorry, I don't have great audio. I mean, I don't have great internet quality.
Yeah, sorry. But maybe I can try to summarize what you say. So you say the perspective I'm presenting here is mostly on meta research style, right? So it's presenting the checklists and really on meta level. And I think what you try to ask is, would it be good to get more into the preterm birth trials and see what we can learn from them and how useful they are and how those questions have been of use for clinical practice. Is that correct? Or maybe that's totally different.
Well, I thought it was a very positive comment in that, you know, often meta research gets, you know, it's this hypercritical, everything is, you know, so many bad things about research, but you've actually come out with some very practical ways how to improve research. So you're not way up in the clouds at 10,000 feet. You've actually come to a very pragmatic
but maybe
level.
me being critical to myself, which I think is a next step of this project, and maybe that's what I'm hoping also Richard McGee was trying to allude, that as a clinician I still found this work to be the first step, and the second step will be really where should we get preterm birth going to in the future. As maybe in this overview I try to capture that, but I want to, for preterm birth trialists, to be more specific. So that is the next aim. But that will be in a presentation really for trialists doing preterm birth research. And I wasn't sure if the audience was that interested in that.
No, I think it was great. So Alex has put a question. Alex, are you in a position where your audio is good enough to put it? You sounded pretty good in the introduction. So you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much, Terry. Yeah, a very nice presentation. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it. Just a quick question. Did its criteria features are very good, very valid? But two actually jumped at me. The patient-centeredness, patient engagement as a clinician, and also, what do you call it now? The value for money.
Value for money, yeah.
Yes. So unfortunately, we can only base our analysis on what is reported in RCTs. But on the background of conducting RCTs, I want to believe that, especially towards the value for money, that researchers actually think about it, at some point in designing these studies. So I was wondering, okay, from the analysis now, there was virtually no studies that reported patient-centeredness, and I don't think I saw anything about value for money if I missed that. So I was wondering, how can we improve those two parts of RCT? Now, I'm not being specific about preterm, as it applies to any other topic in any randomized controlled trial. That, okay, in your own opinion, sorry, please go ahead.
No, thanks, Alex. I think you are pointing indeed, maybe the low-hanging fruit I see in this exercise for preterm birth trials, and this sample might be a small, might be representative for other clinical fields as well, that we will find, I bet we will find also this low patient-centeredness and value for money in other type of research too. And part of it is that we are not used to report on them in our manuscript, so that will be more a reporting issue. The second, maybe also, that's the deeper thing, is that we aren't forced to think as researchers, well, what is the incentive to include patients in our RCTs? Sometimes it's because the funders is asking it, and but the incentive should be bigger than that. And I was surprised because in preterm birth we have those kind of important information already in place. The core outcome set is there, so it's using it that is the next step. So that's why it's a low-hanging fruit for preterm birth. And for other fields where there is not a core outcome set yet available, then that is a priority that should be done. As patients have a voice, and actually they are the ones that should also inform the importance of the research questions being addressed and what is important to them. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean,
that's
yeah, sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great and wonderful. We've come to the top of our hour. I mean, I feel this discussion could go on, and I really want to thank you for your great presentation. I think it's very symbolic that StaR has returned to its roots in Amsterdam, and you represent OMC. And I want to announce. Can you give me the last slide again?
I have some difficulties in getting.
No problem. So I want to say that our next talk is coming up in January 13th, Wednesday. And he was the gentleman asking the questions there, Dr. Alex Arabisola, MD, PhD. I think he's got some stunning data on p-value and Bayesian analysis and randomized controlled trials in child health research, published from 2007 to 2017. So please join us at the webinar to get hot off the press data, and come back and listen to Alex. And I just want to say, Hanneke, the comments are very positive. Wonderful work. Thank you. So I just want to echo that. And thanks for taking the time. I know it's 9-10 o'clock there, but we really appreciate this great presentation.
And please, if there are other questions coming, you can reach to Terry also, to reach to me. Happy to continue the discussion. Thank you.
Wonderful. Andy or I know how to reach Hanneke for sure. Okay, thank you.